Good morning. I hope everybody can hear me. Good morning and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Kolmstetter. I'm the Chief Human Capital Officer at USAID, but on a detail to the White House right now in the Office of Personnel and Performance and Personnel Management at OMB, doing some of our human capital work across the government, including the SES executive order that just came out and some of the present management goals associated with engagement, hiring, and executives. So it's really great to be here. I think workforce planning and staffing is a very, very critical topic, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I want to do first is introduce the panel so you have a sense of who we have. We have a wonderful collection of experts and leaders here to share what's going on in the agencies. And I want to thank Debbie for putting this forum together, because I think really what we're not going to do is sit here and talk about what workforce planning is, but rather how it's being applied and what are the successes and some of the challenges and how we overcome those challenges to get to better programs in our agencies. And I think that's what's great about this collective, because we really are sharing those experiences and gleaning from those. So I want to just introduce who we have here before I have each of them give their own little introduction. Far right is Mary Pletcher. She's the Chief Human Capital Officer at the U.S. Department of Interior. And then to her left is John Gill, who is the Chief Human Capital Officer at HHS. And then next we have Veronica Villalobos, who I think more recently has just moved into the Principal Deputy Associate Director of Employee Services at OPM, a very big and very busy role, so welcome. And then the immediate right is John Kostoulis, who is the Director of Strategic Workforce Policy Planning and Management at NASA's Langley Research Center. So you can see a great variety of leaders and subject matter experts who are going to share their experiences. So I think what I'd like to do is have the panel just talk a little bit about themselves and where their agencies are in regard to strategic workforce planning and staffing, and the relative importance this topic is to their mission success. And sort of start it at a higher level, and then we'll go into some questions, and we have time for questions from the audience as well. So why don't I start with Mary with a brief sort of overview on this important topic.
Great, well, it's great to be here. So I am the Chief Human Capital Officer at the Department of the Interior. And for those of you that don't know a lot about the Department of the Interior, we have about 70,000 employees. 54,000 of them are permanent employees, but we have a lot of seasonal folks. So hopefully you're visiting our national parks. A lot of the people that you see at the national parks, for example, are seasonal workers that are, for example, collecting your fees, or are wildland firefighters. We have a huge diversity of missions. So we have 350 occupations at Interior. We run a school system, for example, within Indian country. We have our Bureau of Indian Education. We have our public lands, the national parks, BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service. We produce hydropower and provide water out west. We do volcano and earthquake monitoring. We do oil and gas oversight, and there's a lot of other missions that we provide. So that means from a workforce planning perspective, when you're talking about 70,000 employees in 2,400 operating locations in some of the most remote parts of this country, in the insular areas, that it's an interesting challenge. And I think for us, how we have to think about it is, how do you make at a local level people understand the value of it? Just like any agency, we're struggling with the impending retirement wave. And when we look at the percentage of our permanent employees that are going to retire within the next 5 years, it's incredibly significant. And so getting and understanding at the local level in those 2,400 places about why workforce planning is important is something that we have to think through kind of on a regular basis. I think one of the other things we have to think about is scale. So when you hear about workforce planning, when you have a limited number of occupations, there's some different things that you can do versus when you have a huge variety and not having a huge density. So with 2,400 locations, our people are scattered everywhere. And so for us, as we think about the question of scale, where do you apply resources in thinking about workforce planning where you really can make an impact? So one current example is in oil and gas oversight. We use workforce planning to help us with some of our STEM occupations like petroleum engineering. So we really have to use a lot of different tools and techniques to do workforce planning at Interior, but it's incredibly exciting because people really are our mission. We have an incredibly people-intensive mission. We rely on the 70,000 employees to do what we do and serve the American people. So it's important for us to invest in workforce planning and ensure we've got a workforce for the future.
So we could good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me here. So our agency, if you took off the forests and the firefighters and talked about diversity of mission, it is the same in the Department of Health and Human Services. We're about 90,000 persons strong, 11 major operating divisions, and they are notable in terms of their brands. So it's the Center for Disease Control and National Institutes of Health, and the Center for Medicare, Medicaid Services, and Food and Drug Administration, and the Administration for Children and Families. So you get the sense that this is a medical, health, science, service type of organization and social service type of organization that is the Department of Health and Human Services, and we are in fact that backbone for the nation. Much like Mary said, it is quite diverse. One of the issues that we have to deal with is the notion of changing science, and as we think about planning, it is not done in the context of today, but it's done in the context of where scientific advancement is going to be over the next 3 to 5 years, both in terms of our gearing effect in making that happen as a federal government, but equally so private sector technology that grows as well. So as, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, as we think of workforce planning, we are quite specific with it. And to be honest, we don't do it as a broad-based 90,000 person, 11 operating division organization. It's got to be precise. It's got to be precise, oftentimes in the health sciences and the medical sciences area, and including some technology, which we'll talk about in a bit. So, a tremendously powerful, impactful, and prideful organization. And as Mary said, I would say the same thing. The scientific and political community that is really the backbone of health and human services really make it happen. And ranging from our social service folks that support the children coming across the border in this immigration crisis that we have right now, and ensuring that they have care and feeding and proper medical services, all the way up to our National Cancer Institute, who are solving the cancer problem. It's an extraordinarily prideful and strong talent group that we have, and our intention there is to keep that growing. The other risk that we have, the thing that we're keeping our eye on, is the demographics, much as Mary said. And whilst we have this, certainly burgeoning retirement plan coming up, we also are very much in tune with trying to get the next generation in. And not only getting them in, but equally so creating an environment from which they will want to stay, in which they will want to stay. So we're spending quite a bit of time on attacking that in very different ways, and we'll talk about that as well.
Thank you, John. Veronica.
Good morning. I'm Veronica Villalobos, and I'm the newly appointed Principal Deputy Associate Director at the Employee Services and OPM. I say all of that to say that some of my vocabulary is still developing on strategic workforce planning, so if you'll bear with me. Before this life, I was in the Diversity and Inclusion Office. I was the director. We were starting out the government-wide effort, and we wanted some new challenges, and so I moved over to this office, and we got some new vision for the D&I office. When we think about strategic workforce planning, one of our main focus areas is the 2011 finding by GAO that we are in jeopardy when it comes to human capital in the federal government and strategic human capital, right? So what we think about when we think about how we're going to solve this issue and take it off the high-risk list is that workforce planning, that strategic staffing approach, and the skills gap that we're working. And we're working on that skills gap not only from a government-wide level, and we're focusing on 5 occupations, but we're also starting to work with the agencies to help them identify their mission-critical skills gap areas. The other piece that we're looking at differently is how we apply policy and how we work with agencies to use the policy that OPM develops. So historically, we issue policy, we issue guidance, and when people call us with questions, we respond to those questions. And one thing I want to do differently in strategic workforce planning in our center here is take an approach of education, coordination, and collaboration. So that not only do we just issue policy, but that we take time with our stakeholders to educate each other and to create that continuous learning environment around strategic workforce planning. And that we collaborate with our folks, making sure that there's work where we're sharing successful practices, where we're constantly back and forth in communication, and that we're truly coordinating our efforts, because we're talking about a workforce of 2.1 million people. And so there's not going to be one approach that fits all, but there's lots of opportunity to learn, share successful practices, not only within all of our departments and agencies, but also across across the street, if you will, with all of our private sector and industry partners. So that's the approach that we're looking to take. I think we'll get into some of the more specific areas that we're focusing, but that is what we're doing in our Center on Strategic Workforce Planning.
Thank you. John.
Good morning, and thank you for being here, and thank you for the invitation to sit on this panel. My name is John Kostoulis. I'm from NASA Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia, and Director of Strategic Workforce Planning, and I'm an engineer. I'm an aerospace engineer, so I'm probably one of the few engineers in here. But my experience base has been working across all of NASA's missions, aeronautics, space science, earth science, human exploration, going to Mars, space technology, as well as now I'm on the mission support side, institutional side of the agency. So I have a broad experience base across the technical sides, the program management side, and the institutional sides of the agency. Strategic workforce planning to us is pretty simple. It's making sure we have the right skills available at the right time, at the right levels to execute the mission of the agency. And what we've done is we're in the process of developing a 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year strategic plan for our workforce. And we'll basically have what our skills are that we have today, what we're going to need in 5 years, what we're going to need in 10 years, and what we're going to need in 20 years. And as we're working our way through this huge transition and attrition of our workforce, we're going to be strategically looking at every one of our hires in the agency, and we're not going to be looking at a backfill kind of approach. We're going to be looking at a future fill or a forward fill kind of approach, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that today and how we manage that and how we've changed some of the culture in the agency to look at it in a kind of a different way, so that we're looking towards the future in our hires versus where we've been. So with that in mind, looking forward to our discussions today.
And I'm going to type in from my USA, with my USA hat on, in terms of how important strategic workforce planning is. It is critical because the large proportion of our workforce serves overseas in foreign countries, which have very different rules and cultures and scenarios going on that are ever changing. So that is on the sort of a global look. Some of our other departments are more domestic, but we're really facing global changes, and in some cases we have to evacuate out of countries, or we're closing down missions because the country has matured out of needing developmental aid, and we move into new countries where there are scenarios like Ebola that hits and so forth. So it's a very, we need agile systems where we know what skills we need to have them in the right place at the right time, and very much this mobile, deployable, ever-ready workforce. And so that is critical to our mission success. And I think you hear that theme, and that is what workforce planning is about, is supporting the business mission strategy to success. So let me talk a little bit of framing now about this topic, because I think it's exciting. A lot of folks call us, we're in the talent age, and that is so exciting because we are all talking about the people and the talent. What skills do we need? What knowledges? What capabilities? How do you put that together in the right team, in the right unit, in the right location? So we are doing this to prepare for uncertain future, right? And to mitigate any risks that we may feel might jeopardize our ability to be successful as an organization. So anyone who's working in this area, and I hope most of you are familiar enough, know there's not even one definition for workforce planning, right? And I'm okay with that because I'm like Veronica. We don't need a one-size-fits-all. If it's really done right, it's tied to what the mission and the organization needs. And that goes from a 10-person organization to a 100,000-person organization to our government of 2.1 million civilians. So you don't really need one definition. I think you need the concepts and the description of what this is and why it's important, and then it gets to be fit into meeting the need. So what I'm going to say for a description of workforce planning, it's a process. It's not a plan. But because plan is in there as a plan, people think, oh, I'm going to end up with this nice plan at the end of this process. It's actually about the process because it's about readiness. And it's about trying to be ready for a future we can't predict and is never going to actually be the way we are thinking about it. But it's that getting that readiness, getting that process in the managers, down to the local levels, so people are more ready and more able to think about how they move their talent, forward fill their talent, think about what more skills are needed in their talent base. So I would say that it's really a description. It's a process that might result in a plan, and that's great, but know that that's going to ever be changing. If you're doing it, it's an ongoing process, constantly looking at the environment, doing the scan of what's changing. And so I would also say it is very forward-looking. You've heard that, designed to predict, and really thinking about where we need the talent management. So I like Human Capital Institute's description. There's two things. There's an operational workforce planning and a strategic workforce planning. So I'm going to take a moment just to define the two, because some of you in your organizations are at different parts or different places with this, and that's great. As long as we're all on this journey, we're doing good work. So operational workforce planning really focuses on skills and capabilities that are needed in sort of the 6-month to 18-month time frame. That more current look and feel for what's going on now that I need to address with my workforce capability. Looking at staffing decisions in the short term to ensure the organization may meet its growing, or its declining, or its changing business needs. It's more like if-then scenarios are being done. If this happens, then we're going to do this with our current folks in the short term. It's more looking at current state and making sure that it's right for that short term. Versus strategic workforce planning, which really is a very different time horizon and focus. It's looking at that 3 to 5 year. That's the strategic, and I heard John from NASA talking about that and what they're doing, and my gosh, all the way to 20 years, which would be exciting. So that's really
The
kind
cone of uncertainty is large.
Yes, it's very large.
At the 20-year mark, I'll tell you that. But at least we have a path.
Which planet are we going to be on?
That's right. At least we have a path that we're
I
following.
love it. So strategic is that longer term future, 3 to 5 years. It's about anticipating new skills, roles, situations that might not even exist today, that we can't even comprehend, but we need to be thinking about because it is so much tied to the mission and to the organization's success. It deals with variables that can't actually be predicted around maybe technology changes or global environmental changes in relation to the organization's mission. And it really focuses on identifying roles that are critical to getting to that long term. So as opposed to looking at the whole pie, it's going to really focus on what are those vital roles and focusing on a very future on some of them, but not the whole thing. So that's just a little framing. And both are good and both are great. Most organizations start in the operations, the here and now, and move and want to move to the strategic. So that's sort of a normal journey. And it's really, again, all of it is good. They're both critical and necessary. I think in the government we end up being a lot of reactive, especially as our leadership's changing and in transition. Leaders come in and they kind of want to know current state here and now and do some shifting and changing in that state, and we have to help them with our tools and processes get to that future state. We don't want to just always live in that short term as we evolve our talent strategies. I like that every one of our panelists talked about business strategy driving the workforce planning strategy. Oh, can we have a mute? If you're on the phone, could you please mute?
Yeah, these are a little different.
I don't think. Please mute your phone if you're on the line. Thank you. So I like this categorization of the business strategy really sets up the why we need this. why we need a workforce plan is because the business is going here, or we have these long-term goals that we're striving for. And then the strategic workforce planning process will get you to what we need, where we need it, when we need it, and what cost we're going to do. I heard seasonal workers, short-term, permanent workers. We have the same thing, contract workers versus permanent federal, short-time, part-time workers. That's all part of a workforce planning process because there are different costs associated with those different types of employment contracts. So that's going to be part of your strategic workforce plan. And then the other confusing thing, I think, is that we sometimes interchange strategic workforce planning with talent management. And strategic workforce planning is really that, the process of getting to what we need, and talent management is how we're going to do that. How are we going to get a capable workforce? Through hiring, through developing leaders, through retention programs. So the talent management strategy is the how we're going to address the workforce planning that we've done. I would also say workforce planning is foundational. If your organizations are going about doing talent management and you haven't spent time talking about a workforce plan, that you're going to miss some key integration to the business strategy. So it's foundational. I always put it in the circle of my talent management framework because it's always feeding your hiring plan, your retention plan, even some exit strategies. We're no longer doing this part of the mission. Well, how are we going to either cross-train those people or exit those people in different things? That's all fed from a workforce plan, right? So that's a little bit of framing. I hope that's helpful, just kind of because I think operational and strategic get a little intertwined. I would like to now ask the panel to address a really important question that we've talked about here, but specifically in your workforce planning efforts, how you identify the talent needs and what strategies you're using to close the gaps. Because a lot of this is about, we have this, but we know we need this, and there's a gap. So how are you using your workforce planning efforts to close the gap, and what models and processes your agencies have successfully used and the managers using to work on those gap closing, those talent enablers that you're looking for? Anybody want to jump in with the answer? Okay, John from NASA.
So we took a really long-term look at what we think we're going to need from an agency perspective to execute the mission. That kind of where the fundamental start is. What are the mission drivers that are going to drive the technologies and drive then the skills you need to execute that mission? So one of the things we did when we put things in place is we looked at what we currently had, spent some time making sure we defined what we currently had, and then looked at what we thought we're going to need over the next 5, 10, 20 years, and did a strategic roadmap of every one of those skills to what we think our future requirements are. From there, we then drove what does that mean to how we're hiring, what we're hiring, how we're training, how we're recruiting. That the whole integration of that started from spending time understanding where we were headed with our mission. And if you miss that step up front, you're going to have a gap, a big gap, when you go to the end to execute your workforce strategy. The thing I want you to keep in mind is, think of a hurricane analogy, right? Over the next 1 to 2 days, the models and forecasts are probably pretty accurate of where that hurricane is going. Same thing with workforce planning. You're probably pretty good over the next 1 to 3 to 5 years. But as you move down your plan, or as the hurricane moves down its track, or the longer term forecast, that kind of uncertainty grows, right? But what strategic workforce planning does is it allows you to periodically assess the direction of that track and re-vector as you need to change your workforce hiring and your workforce strategy itself, and some of the strategic guidance you're providing to your agency. So our managers have kind of warmed up to that. They see that. They go, oh, here's a strategy and a plan that outlines where we're headed over the next 20 years, but we get a chance to kind of work through that as we go. But we're proactively prepared. Rather than reacting to things, we have a plan and we're proactively executing that plan. And we re-vector on a, case-by-case basis. As the mission changes, we revector the strategy. As external drivers change, we revector the strategy. But at least we have something to start from, and that's the biggest thing that, has helped our leaders execute the mission. So, yeah, that's our question.
I'm Carlene Peterson from Department of Treasury. I'm the program manager for our workforce planning process at Treasury. And can we get back to a little bit of a basic as opposed to just looking at how we're already closing skill gaps? Because some of you made comments about managers warming up. For us, we have a great model and a process and a plan that we use. The key for us is, number one, convincing our managers and our units and our bureaus that, number one, workforce planning has value. Two, that it takes time, and you can't just think about, I know it in my head, I know what I need, but they're not really going through the initial strategic setting your direction, where I'm going, what's my mission, what does my workforce look like in 5-10 years based on my mission. So, and you talk about change communication. These are the key areas I know in Treasury, and we've got a semi-automated system, that tool that they can use to make it easier. But these are managers who are working managers who have a difficult time stopping to strategize, to plan. So for us, it's like, how do we show real value if you don't go through the process, to see the value, to get them, to go through the entire process, and to get their mind out of the budget, which is that short-term staffing, exercise that we do every year with budget, and get them out of the concept of, well, I don't have the money, I'm not going to know the money in 3 years, I'm not going to know what we're going to have in 5 years, how do I plan if I don't know how much I can spend? It's that idea that we can't think outside the box, and getting them to think differently.
So that's actually two of our questions, so we will definitely get to that, so thank you. But also, it's a good reminder to embed those challenges as we answer the questions. But yes, we recognize that this is something, it's one more thing that managers have to spend some time on, that they're not yet maybe all understanding what's the value.
In my mind, I'm thinking through the logical plan of how we go through any closing skill gaps. To me, is that talent management. How do we figure out what we have, what we need, and then we decide what are the different ways, what are the different strategies, other than just hiring behind that one. Maybe we don't need that job anymore. Maybe we need a restructure. Maybe we need to be more efficient and effective at how we provide for our mission. So, and again, I don't want to jump ahead, but I was thinking that might, for me, that's more logical thinking and how I progress through the process.
Let me kind of play with that, respond to Elizabeth's question, but kind of work with that as well. I talked before about our agency going at this with what I would call preciseness, as opposed to the extraordinary planning that John was talking about. And I recall about 2 years ago, as we were doing our scans across the various operating divisions, I learned, and we learned, for instance, that Indian Health Services runs 17 hospitals and 170 clinics in some of the most remote locations in the country, serving our Native Americans. And one of the things that was one of their biggest struggles was getting point of contact care delivered at a sophisticated level. And what they were beginning to explore, as you would imagine, is the remote diagnostic capability that comes with the new technology that's in place right now, and the application of medicine and medical science to that. Then we moved over to the Center for Disease Control. And the Center for Disease Control is looking, as you know, at some major disease control conditions, not only here in the United States, but globally. And they were beginning to rely also on a component of medical science and a component of technology here. And then we looked at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and a particular organization that has to do with their innovation. And the Affordable Care Act was in place. There's two components to it. One is access, and the other one is modifications and changes to the whole healthcare delivery system. And it comes in two flavors. One has to do with the cost associated with it, and the other has to do with quality. And the individuals that I was talking to up there were medical doctors tied to technologists. And I could go on. I could talk about the regulatory environment at FDA. I could talk about, biomedical research at NIH. And what is clear, or what was becoming clear to us, is that there was an absolute intersection going on between medicine and technology. And this wasn't sitting in anybody's workforce plan. It was just beginning to happen. And so the conversation was with these tremendously bright and highly enthusiastic senior people in the organization and junior people in the organization, and they were beginning to see that combination, and from a human resources standpoint, in a much more natural way, we began to talk to them about how might we put those things together from a convergence standpoint, and what does a new job series looks like that combines these things, that gets you where you need to go, both with immediate effect, but also begins to look at putting capability together to predict where it's going in the future. And so, from my perspective, it has to be mission backed for sure to begin with. I think we're fortunate, and probably many of my colleagues are too, in our agency, that people are really switched on to what they do. So, I mean, they are really switched on. And so, going with them as they're thinking about their future has made a difference in starting to put different kinds of planning together, particularly around this area of the convergence of medicine and technology. And we have platforms in place by which people can do sharing. So, as near as last week, it's called the Health and Human Services Innovation Council, and one of the showcase reviews was Center for Disease Control, talking about the collaborative relationship they had built with Georgia Tech in bioinformatics, and how that's going to begin the talent development piece and the pipeline piece, and also tremendous research capability that sits in many of our universities that can in fact be a gearing effect for us as we look at a long-term plan. So I think we have to make it, in my view, much less clinical is the wrong word, much less the programmatics, and I think we said this before, and the tool set, than it is the engagement with the leaders who are trying to take the business to a different place.
Yeah, if I can build a little bit on that. As we're doing the cyber human capital strategy, right, this is something that's required by a memo that was issued by OPM October 30th. I remember the day, because we have to have the strategy ready by April 30th based on that memo. And we're taking a sprint approach to how we're developing that human capital strategy. We've developed 4 different teams around data analytics, a workforce that has never been truly measured, right? And we've gotten a lot of that data back, and we're still looking at it, but we don't even know what we need, and we don't know exactly the skills that are required in each of those aspects of what some people think of as IT and others think of as a totally different discipline, right? And then we had to look at that recruitment and hiring piece for a group of folks that were being told there is no pipeline yet, and we have to figure out how to build that pipeline as part of the strategy. And how we're going to hire them in a process that people say we can't get the talent fast enough. We want multidiscipline, multi-project, multi-skill levels. And then thinking about retention, which we always connect with pay, but what all the data is telling us, it's got more to do with that talent development piece, and that's that 4th piece. And at first, when we started talking about this with our CIO folks, they were like, what are you trying to get us to do here? I mean, this is some very exacting things, and we don't see how we play in this space. And as we've been working together, and this has evolved, what we find is we have shared interest. They care deeply about how we approach each piece of this. They have been employing different strategies, and excellent strategies, I should add, throughout government that we can spread across the entire corporate entity, right? but they had to see where it connected with what they were already doing. It had to connect with what they cared about. And when we first started talking to them about it, they were like, building a pipeline, who cares, right? Talent development, we train them. What more do you want from me, right? And so it was a process of thinking about, how are you using the training for certification? How can we think about using your training for creating a badge system where people can start collecting these badges as something very meaningful in this industry? Thinking about how we link together different pay and other kinds of incentives, right? Student loan repayment, a whole host of things that at first glance, they didn't sound particularly interested in. But as we started working through it, the interest grew, and we now have a very robust plan that we have to develop the story around. Because that's the other piece. So many times we develop these things, and it just sounds like strategy, and our managers don't hear the story in it. And that's one of the pieces, I think, that also sells why human capital matters.
Mary? You wanna-
I know we have other questions, so you want to.
No, okay. So let me summarize what I'm hearing is for a success, it really needs to be about a manager decision-making process. It can't be, here's another HR program you have to do, and here's what you need, templates you need to fill out. It has to be talked about as a management decision-making process, because it does get to what is important to them, what catalyst has happened that is the dynamic that we've described here that they need to address through workforce capabilities. And they are happening all the time. You just are going to have to keep your antenna up. We just did a whole budget drill on what would a 5% cut look like. Tell your managers, look at your work unit. What would a 5% cut look like? That's a cut of workforce. What skills, maybe what you don't need anymore, or what can come off the plate if there's anything left, which I don't think so. But that starts a conversation around your workforce capability, and it has some hard decisions, some hard thoughts going into, because if we come in every day, everything's important, it all has to get done and all of that, but it kind of steps you back to say, wait a minute, I really need to dissect this. Use things like that. That's sort of a negative one, but that is a reality in those of us in government where the budget is very lean and not getting bigger. So we have to do that. We can use that as a way for managers to start to really delve in. A surge capability, a new technology. Hey, what would you do if all of a sudden you can automate these processes, and in the next 5 years, these manual processes are going to be automated? What does that do to the workforce issues? What are you going to do around that? How does that change? Is it training? Is it redeploying? You got to start asking some questions, but let the managers answer. Don't do the HR thing where we try to answer for them and come with, here it is. Give them the tools. There's a lot of great tools and models out there to follow, but they drive it. They have the discussions, facilitated through a process, but it's all about what they need, and that will tie it, and that will start to grow legs and start to see that these are things that will really help them to meet their needs. So that kind of leads to one of the questions we had, which is really how can you help our audience on how you successfully lead a change effort from more traditional and budgetary views, which I just used as an example, but we all live in that world, that they look at budget view of counting things, like counting billets or counting FTE, to really to the capability, to really to the skills, knowledge, talents. And that's where we get to real talent management, not how many people we need, or we need 3 GS-13s because we don't know anything what a GS-13 can do just by a job title and a grade, right? That's not talent, that's just what we pay the person. So how do we get that conversation to skills and talents and mix of skills and competencies? And that's a change management as well. Maybe you can pick up Mary.
So I'll start with that. So I think one thing we've found that works really well is when you have a mission driving event. Let me give you a couple examples in the interior context. So 2016, we're celebrating the 100-year anniversary of the National Park Service, America's Best Idea. And so it's this point, but for us, it's this inflection point about what does the next 100 years look like. And so you know the centennial's coming. I see the ad campaigns for Find Your Park, but it's also about what does the future look like. And so here's this mission event, our anniversary, and we haven't used it to talk just purely about what's our digital strategy, because the world's very different now than 100 years ago. There's also been a conversation about what does the workforce look like? How do we better support, how do we align with our next generation of stakeholders? The country has changed. It's more urban. Kids spend a lot more time indoors. People, we're all on our devices. So what does it mean for what we do? And what does that mean from a talent perspective? And so there's been this multi-year effort to really think through that issue, but very much tied to the mission, tied to what people deeply care about. So for example, here's a challenge that the Park Service has to think through. International visitation has skyrocketed. So how do you accommodate the visitors that we get coming? There are hundreds of millions of visitors that come to our public lands every year. We have a strategic priority called the Engaging the Next Generation. And there's 4 pillars that kind of savvy, play, learn, serve, work. But it's like this idea about how do you connect people to their public lands and their public lands in their backyard. And it's talking about kids. How do you learn that the outdoors is fun? It's little kids, it's their families. But then when you carry it all the way through from a talent management perspective, certainly not all of the kids are going to end up as employees of the Department of the Interior, but you have to get them early because studies show they basically have decided their majors by middle school, early high school. So if we don't connect them really young to what we do and why it's fun and interesting, they won't be coming to work for us. So here's this mission-driving event where we thought about our workforce, not just in the short term, but as we think about 20 years from now, when the kids that are playing outside today would be the people coming into our workforce. Totally different kind of example, but how do you use a crisis to think about workforce planning? So maybe we go back a few years ago in Deepwater Horizon and down in the Gulf. There were a number of human capital aspects about that. It's a very specialized skill set to think about deep sea structural engineering, petroleum engineering. We're drilling in deeper and deeper locations. So there was this mission forcing function where we were in a crisis, but it didn't stop there. It's how do we think forward? How do we make sure we can actually attract the petroleum engineers and geophysicists and think about the skill sets and talent and train and develop them? So kind of 2 different places where it wasn't workforce planning in a vacuum. It's deeply, deeply connected to the mission. And we could go across all of our bureaus and offices and illustrate that connection. Sequestration was certainly a wake-up call. It was difficult. We have an incredibly people-intensive mission. We have key components of our organizations that have linear funding. So how do you meet those kinds of cuts? And you're in a place where you probably can't hire. And so we saw our bureaus use that kind of event to really take advantage of things like voluntary early retirement authority, voluntary separation incentive payments, because there was this moment in time, but they used it to think about what does the next 3 to 5 years look like, and how might they think about shaping their workforce differently. We've worked really well with our bureaus on bureau and VISA requests should not be scary things. It doesn't mean it's voluntary. And so how do you use it as a tool for people who are interested in it to move on to something else, and that gives us an opportunity to backfill with different skills or restructure accordingly. So all of our bureaus are in different places, but again, kind of using the connection to a mission driving event, and then also translating it down to a local level. At a small park, I'm not concerned if they know what strategic workforce planning is and what the whole framework might be. I'm happy if the chief of maintenance knows, hey, my mechanic, who is the only person who knows how to kick the box in exactly the right way, because we have historic assets, he's going to retire. What am I going to do? That's workforce
Yeah.
planning.
Yeah.
And so if the chief of maintenance is sitting and saying, wow, I know I have these historical structures and I think my mechanic that I've relied on for the last 15 years is going to retire, maybe I should be thinking about these seasonal workers and who has an opportunity that they could become my next mechanic for this very special asset that we have. They may not know they're doing workforce planning. They may not have followed this formal process, but that's exactly what they're doing. They're thinking about what they need, how it might be different. So certainly even in the physical infrastructure world, there's a lot more technology, and they're thinking about this other pipeline, our huge seasonal worker assets, and their capabilities, and how that need may be met. And here's another example. We have hundreds of thousands of volunteers on the public lands, and we want more volunteers. So if at a local level, someone's thinking about, well, how do I actually support volunteers? They're doing workforce planning. They may not know that's what they're doing, but as long as they're going through that steps, that's success to us as well, because we're honoring our local culture and we're having people think at a ground level, what does it mean to them? We do far better when we can honor that local nature and have it translated, as opposed to having people kind of take time out. And then there's this, yet another thing that we're asking them to do. So they're doing it. They're doing workforce planning. They don't always know that that's what it is, but that's absolutely what they're doing.
If I can augment what Mary's saying, because we worked with Mary and the team at the National Park Service. They did a fantastic job of really looking at what that future state is, the vision, and understanding that there would be multiple steps to get there, that it would evolve, and that they had to do that change management, make that which was complex feel simple. And a lot of this had to do with diversity and inclusion. We did a lot of work on the data analytics, and that was behind the scenes, and we worked with them. And my understanding is the managers don't know all of what that looked like, but they know that there's a vision of the end state and that it will evolve, but they play a role in that. And I think that is probably the most important thing they did from the outset.
So very tactically here, I'm going to speak very tactically. How do you get your leaders and your managers to change, right? This culture change of very tactical look at their workforce on a day-to-day basis to more of a strategic look. So we changed the dialogue. It was no longer about a number. Most of our managers were focused on how much budget I had and how many people do I have. What's my number, my billets, right? Oh, I can't let Billy Sue go over to that organization because I lose a billet. Because when she goes, I lose a billet. So we changed that whole dynamic at right now we're changing it across the agency. So what we did was we focused it on the what. So all of our dialogue, we took the budget, the billets, and we moved it strategically up at our center level. And now we're moving it to the agency level. And we are now asking our leaders and our managers to focus on the what. And have that dialogue about what it is you need in your people, what do your people need to be successful, and what kind of environment you need for your people to be successful in executing the mission. So we took kind of the day-to-day things that were clouding that and making it difficult for them to focus on the people and focus on the what. We took that off their plate. And we involved them in that dialogue, and we said, here's what we're going to be doing. And they went, oh, I don't have to worry about that anymore? I said, no, we're going to manage that. My folks manage that in the strategic workforce planning. Us and the OCFO together manage that for the center. And so the agency saw this and they went, oh, this makes a lot of sense because we're spending a lot of time talking about our numbers and not talking about the what. So the agency has picked up on that, and now they're looking at doing an agency-wide strategic planning and thinking about how they can take some of that burden off of our managers and our leaders so that they can focus on the what. So that was one of the things that we did that has really changed the dialogue. So we have, the other thing we did is we have quarterly workforce meetings, strategic work. We call them strategic, even though they're tactical, we call them strategic. Because we're talking no longer about their budget or how many billets they need. We talk about the hiring we are going to be doing over the next year, and what it is we are doing and what are the priorities for those. And they come in with their priorities. We integrate that at the center level, and in this case, we're moving it up to the agency at the corporate level. We're going to be doing an agency-wide workforce plan. And we'll have on a yearly basis what our hiring priorities are, top to bottom, across the agency, across all 9 NASA centers, including the Jet Propulsion Lab out in Pasadena. So the biggest culture change is we involve them in our process, and we changed their thinking from about we're no longer holding them accountable to their number. They don't have a number. All those backroom deals of going up to their manager and their leader saying, hey, float me a billet. I got Billy going to retire next week. Float me a billet so I can go move forward. We took all that dialogue off the table. We manage it strategically, and it has really helped the managers go, oh, wow, I don't have to worry about this anymore. It has really, and it's a very tactical and simple thing to do. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, right? Sometimes it's counterintuitive, but it has really helped. I'm going to be honest with you. But it's taken about 1.5 years for kind of everybody to kind of come together and say, oh, now I know what we're supposed to be doing. It's about the people, about the what, and it's been working. So, matter of fact, the leaders get together quarterly and we talk about this, and when somebody brings up a strategic need for a hire, the other managers go, oh wow, now I see how that fits in our strategy, and now I see why that is important to do.
At what level are those leaders?
We do it at what we'll call our directorate level. So our engineering directorates, our OCFO, OCIO, our human capital, our program office level, so we do it kind of at the director level. We integrate that, and I take that up to the center director and say, here's our center level hiring plan. And here's how it maps against our strategic goals, here's how it maps against our strategy, here's how it maps against what products we're thinking about providing now and in the future. And you know, our OD, our Office of Director, they bless it. And then it goes back to the organizations for implementation. So all they're responsible for is implementing it. They pull it together from their bottoms up. They grow a bottoms up plan, capability plan. They integrate it. Then I integrate it at the center level, and then it goes back down to them for execution. So it's a pretty interesting process that we have. So it's something very tactical. And then now we're doing it at the corporate level. We're going to be doing it across the agency.
Well, that's what we want to do Treasury, because this way you can leverage training, you can leverage talent, you can leverage all these types of dollar costs that you have to do bureau by bureau. Why do that when we have similar needs across Treasury? But it's getting them out of that mindset and developing let me build the justification I need to have an additional billet, let's say, or to do this or to do that. They just are not trained to do that, and it's hard to get them to rethink that. But taking that away from them.
And we flow down to them, we say, for this group, total, here's how many hires we're doing this year. You tell us what the priorities are within that set of numbers. And, you know, we manage that. They don't have to worry about the numbers. All they have to do is discuss the priorities and agree on the priorities across the whole center. Then now again, the challenge is going to be moving that up to the agency level, which is what we're doing now. We've just started kicking that off. We have a business services assessment that we've been doing over the last 6 to 8 months, and one of the things that's coming out of the human capital business services assessment was we needed to do strategic workforce planning like this across the agency. So a team's being pulled together to kind of look at that.
So one of the things that's interesting about even this conversation, we talk about it in different ways. But if you peel back some of the ways we think about it, the tools and the tips may be similar, but we talk about it in a way that actually honors our mission and cultures. And so I think that's where you see the success is how you translate the tips, the tools, and processes to a way that your organization understands. A NASA engineer is going to understand the world very differently, for example, than a national procurement superintendent. And so it's translating what sometimes can be perceived as academic to language that makes sense within our missions. How we would talk about workforce planning within geological survey, which is all scientists, is different than we would talk across our other
even our science manager, who manages our science directorate, they were like, okay, I don't have to worry about the budget stuff and the number stuff anymore, I can focus on the what. And we were like, yes, that's what we want you to focus on, the what. Tell us
We
what
love
you need,
numbers.
which is exactly your point. You know, it was kind of a relief off their shoulder. So.
I have a question on that. I mean, because they still need to kind of communicate to you what they think they'll need, at least kind of down the road. Is it, so in a way, you're kind of driving that urgency for them to communicate what they're going to do. How does that dialogue unfold within the
Well,
new
again,
system?
we have quarterly workforce meetings. We call our managers together quarterly, our leaders together quarterly. We talk about, you know, here's what the agencies told us they need, and here's the direction we're going, and how do you see your organization fitting in that, and where are the priorities? Where are your what priorities, right? What are those skills? What are the, are we moving into a new area of science that we need, you know, new skills on? That sort of thing. So we kind of do it, and then at the, we have the PPBE process, the budgeting process, right, that happens every year. So we just gotten our guidance, right? And we are now putting forward strategic direction for the next year and the next 5-year horizon. And we do that through our framework. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's elegant and it's brilliant.
One thing I do wonder though is that in a time of plenty versus a time of, let's say, sequestration, I think you'll always have to adjust, right?
Exactly.
Because the response to what's our future state will look different in those scenarios.
Yeah.
And you go more from a coordination and collaboration state to a fearful state where people are shutting down.
Yeah, and especially when you're dealing with, you know, reduced ceilings and everything else, you know, all those kinds of things, you have to be able to respond to them. But as long as you have a plan, you're proactively managing that. And you understand what your priorities are. I mean, we actually have a list of high priority skills, skills that we're going to maintain, and skills that we're transitioning and going out of. And we're going to do that at the agency level. So.
Can I just, I want to tee up one more question and then we'll open it up, because one of the reasons we thought this was timely was we know we have an administration change coming up. And I just wanted to ask the panel what impact or effect that this change and turnover of political leadership will have on your agency's workforce planning, and have you been thinking about that and readying your managers for the inevitable change to perhaps mission priorities, certainly initiatives and interests of a new administration. Party aside, there's going to be new leadership coming in appointed positions. And how might that be part of your thinking now as you prepare for that transition? You want to keep that up, John? Or does it make impact? You can say.
Well, I don't want to say it that way.
It definitely impacts.
You know, our core,
Certainly.
our core work's going to remain pretty much the same in terms of the mission that we have. And you're absolutely right. That there will be some changes on the edges of these things. We'll certainly listen to ongoing debates around entitlements, which sits inside of our organization. But if the president is any harbinger of the future, we just had a quite a good budget cycle, which has put quite a bit of continued pressure on human resources, which is a good thing to have. It's not about reduction, it's about growth and making sure we've got the right folks in place. The thing that I think is going to be important going through this, and it sounds like a little bit more tactical, but it's quite important, is to assure that we have what I would call a structure of enduring going through the transition. So that means that those things that we have, and a lot of our you know, our game is very long term, as is John's and other organizations too. Some of it's immediate, so we sit here today worrying about the Zika virus, for instance, and that is you know, going to get funded, and it's going to have to be dealt with immediate effect. Many of the things that we do are much longer term, much longer term. And what we must do is ensure that we have lined up to our political appointees really strong career people that understand where this particular administration wanted to go, consider that in the context of the long-term sustainability of the mission support that we provide to the nation and, quite frankly, the globe right now, particularly in the area of global health security, and ensuring that those programs stay on track. Anything, in my view, anything that is that is risky, not even risky, anything that is in the red zone is always fair game for cuts. My assumption would be, I've not lived through one of these transitions, but that's private sector, that's what I would look at and say, how healthy is that? So from my perspective, it's ensuring that we're really clear on the long-term mission of health and human services, and that we have any programmatics around that properly staffed in the context of the management philosophy around it, the strategic approach that we're taking to delivering that particular program, and that it's adequately invested in to be able to carry itself forward.
So I think Interior's missions, there's some pieces of our mission that would be very stable from administration to administration, to John's point, that will change a lot. There's aspects of our mission where it can be very different from administration to administration. So how you think about energy development, how you think about endangered species protection. There you can have kind of different swings in that. The role of the private sector in delivering our mission. Those are 3 examples kind of off the top. And so for our bureaus and offices, it's knowing those areas, because again, I think there's aspects of our mission that are very stable, but then there's aspects where there can be big differences from one administration to the next. I think in terms of preparation, know our data. So with 350 occupations and the number of locations, one of the best things we can do to prepare is really know and be able to present in a way that someone coming in new for the first time to Interior understands what is our workforce, where are they located, what do they actually do. And so we're making efforts to kind of really do that preparation on the data analytics to translate 70,000, 2,400 locations and 350 occupations to something that's meaningful, where you can really think about what the opportunity for change is. So, like what Elizabeth said, with any administration, there'll be a change, and we have fantastic career leaders that have been through this before, and so we will be ready. But I think, unlike probably prior administrations' changes, really knowing our data and being a lot more smart about the business intelligence around it on workforce is something we're doing this time.
All right, let me open up for the room, and then we'll see if anybody on the phone has a question. Okay, we have a microphone.
Thank you. I have to jump in just real quick with this question. So within the context of this discussion, so you kind of frame where you sit in the agency, how you help the agency, how you help your program managers, how you help get the mission done from a strategic standpoint. I think kind of topic that hasn't come up is how you see industry and how you see contractors. And in full disclosure, I'm coming from the perspective of the contractor, but I'm not going to be that guy who says, I sell product X, and so I'm trying to see where I can fit that in. What my question is, within the context of this discussion, what is industry's role? And then how can the industry be better about rising to that role?
So one of the things we're actively doing now, we're spending time understanding what we want our civil servants to do.
Inherently governmental.
Part of that, you're getting correct. And then also, because we do look at how we're going to be acquiring the work and how we're going to be executing the work in the future, we take a real good hard look at what we want our civil servants to do. Where do we think there's capability outside of our organization that's better, right, than what we have? And we're going to want to collaborate with that and leverage that to the highest extent possible. And then also what we're just going to get out of and what we're going to buy. Quite frankly, we're doing those make-buy decisions all the time. What are we going to strategically outsource as an organization? And that's part of our workforce strategy. That's part of our workforce plan. It has to be part of it. But it all goes back to, what do you want our civil servants to do? What do you want your organization, the civil servants in your organization, your core, to do? Once you've defined that, you can kind of develop the other parts of your strategy. So that might touch on your question in a little different angle. then maybe.
Well, it's on me to figure it out, right? That I get.
Well, I mean, yeah, and we're always reaching out to universities. I mean, somebody brought up the university community. I mean, if you look at how much within NASA, how much we've changed, because most of our fundamental research was done in-house, in our government installations. And over the last 20 years, that has changed. Most of our research is done out in the university community, and they've arose to the occasion. And we need to figure out how to leverage that and how to bring that in. I mean, if you look at DOD and health, NIH, I mean, a lot of that research is done out in that university community. We need to leverage that better, and we haven't been very effective at doing that. So that's part of our strategy, how to go about doing that. You know, what is out in industry that we can leverage as well. So.
If I can just add to that, as we're doing our cyber security workforce
Yeah,
plan,
that's
right?
great.
One of the things
Great.
we're looking at is how do we make sure we have the right mix of full-time, term appointments, industry from our exchange programs, and how are we including in that that consultant role, right? The multi-skill. If you think about all of those different pieces, it's almost like you have to think of it as a small and then extrapolate to the large, because when we started out with the overall and thought about how can we also get contractors to play in this space and how would we put that in our contracting language and have that standard, it was overwhelming at first. So we kind of looked at a smaller version and then how would that work for an entire government. Because too many times what we're doing, and I've seen this in different organizations, is we start out so large and massive in our thinking that we don't even know what the numbers look like. We started out in cybersecurity, and there were departments and agencies that didn't know the size of their contractor workforce. And we tell ourselves that we know more.
NASA does, and they know for 20 years what it's going to be.
And we've spent a lot of time making sure we understand that, yes?
Yeah, but how do we build that mix?
Exactly.
We're not even sure what the numbers are. And that is our job as the strategic workforce plan.
But I really think this discussion has matured. I mean, it used to be,
Yeah.
we as agencies just looked at who were the civil servants, the federal employees, and we have now really moved to that total force picture and bringing in those who we rent or on term, and what skills we think are only really going to be, or this program is only going to be for 3 years. Why are we hiring a 30-year career? So let's have those conversations, have managers have those conversations with HR, explaining there are different types of employments. And maybe it's better to get some of these IT skills and bring them in for a while from industry, but not invest, because the training and the certification and keeping up is such a huge expense. And same thing with where I've come from before, foreign languages. After the Cold War, we had all these Russian speakers. Well, I can't just make a Russian speaker speak Farsi or Pashto next day, because now we're in the Middle East and we need Arabic, you know, but we got a bunch of Russian speakers. We invested in those folks. And so now it's a lot different to say, well, maybe we can do some we hire translators on contracts to do non-secure, you know, translation, and then we can do some other things. So it's really, I really see this as a move to total force and really thinking differently than not a one-size-fits-all, and it's just a Fed for 30 years. That's the exciting part. And contracting and, you know, using outsourcing and other types of mechanisms is really part of this stuff.
I think that, just going back to, I was talking about an Innovation Council meeting a couple of weeks or so ago, and we were in the debate around this issue of supply demand in the technology area, and supply demand because of pressure coming from the private sector on how they pay, et cetera, and so forth. And what we began to talk about and what I shared, and it's much along the lines of what the rest of the panel said, we have a lot of tools in our kit if we use them. You know, there's a schedule of hiring that lets you bring in technology people relatively easily. You can get them in for a period of time. There are other vehicles that we have under the Intergovernmental Partnership Act, so-called IPAs. Extraordinary opportunity to work with the university systems and the research centers, and not only get real work done in the near instance, right, but equally so in the framework of development and pipeline development. You're in those universities using great talent, and they're getting to know you as well. So what was clear to me is that we need, as the HR practitioners, the HR professionals, if many of you are is to really, really be good educators of the options that we have out there. And they buy things exactly right. What John said is exactly right. I mean, there are going to be just some things that we're better off getting the high quality outside and not doing the investment inside. And those are the trades that you make. But I think that would we like to have more tools? Sure. But if you look at it in the totality of our role in the federal government to assure the public trust, to make sure that we have fair and open competition for any role that we have coming in. And then we look at the flexibilities around that. There are, in my view, sufficient to be able to meet the mission in the near term and begin to build the right kind of workforce for the future with what we have.
If I can just add one piece to this. One thing we don't always do is think about how every step of the process affects the talent that comes in, no matter what kind of talent it is. So how are we using assessments when they're first coming through the door, right? What does the PD underneath the position itself look like, even if it's just for a term of appointment or for a very short stint? It's those kinds of things that we don't actually plan for in our strategic plan sometimes, and they're the most vital because people come in and we go, oh, that wasn't exactly what we were looking for, and now we just grew our skills gap. And so that's the one piece I think we sometimes forget.
So I'll add a little bit more on the contractor part. So we've taken some time to look at what we need from a supplemental or a surge capacity to get our work done. We have three categories. We call them supplemental/surge. What are truly support, which are sitting side by side with our civil servants on a day-to-day basis. And the other one is specialized. We know we can't hire those types of specialized skills, radiation physicists, electro-optics engineers, cybersecurity folks, those kinds of things. It makes it very difficult because of our pay structure, grade structure, other things, to hire those types of people with those kinds of skills. So we know when we have work coming in that we need those types of skills. Specialized, we know we're going to go out and hire those skills. We may have some few subject matter experts and key leaders, at pretty high grades that will be working with those folks, but most of them we're going to be hiring. There was another point that was brought up that I thought was really interesting. Just like my train of thought, you brought it up. Lost my train. Hold on. Oh, yes, engagement. The engagement part, the assessment part. So the other thing that's really tactical that we do that kind of helps our folks when they come in the door is we spend time with every hire and we show them and talk to them about what position they're going to sit in and how that connects to the agency mission. So they're engaged the day they come in. They said, oh, I'm working on autonomous systems. Well, they know that they're going to work on autonomous systems for these kinds of things, and here's how they fit into the agency structure. So from day one, they go, I'm sitting here in this branch at this level, but I can see where, I fit into the broader NASA. So we have folks that spend their time on their onboard day when they're doing all their stuff. And we spend 15 minutes just to sit and talk to each one of them about how they fit into the agency mission. And that's part of our workforce strategy, because we want an engaged workforce from the day they step on the project.
How did you do on your engagement survey?
We're pretty good.
Another
Because of that
question.
mission connection.
Right. No,
Because of that
it's-
mission connection.
We see a lot of great business.
And you use contractors for that to do that engagement piece?
It's sometimes, yes, yes.
Other questions from the audience? And how about on the phone? Anybody on the phone have a question?
I have a quick question.
Oh, here's a question in the back.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Suleiman.
You talk about when you centralize everything and for NASA
Oh,
and the grade that you took there, off their table and they have to think about. But what was the pushback? Are some of them, especially at the lower level, once they cannot hire for some of the positions that they wanted, do they see that as a zero-sum game? Is there some pushback? Well, especially
of
early
course.
on. Yes.
Of course there is, because they go, wait a minute, my hire is not important, or my hire didn't fit in the priority, right? Well, we then put the challenge back on them. And we say, okay, we understand you're upset, you didn't get your hire, they talk to their leader, their organizational leader, and we say, okay, tell us where we're wrong in our strategy. Show us, justify, spend the time defining the what and why, and we will relook at that. But it is a continuous process.
Educating process.
Oh yes, it's very iterative, sorry.
All right, thank you.
Anybody from the telephone? Any other questions? Yes? Here?
Hi, so we've talked quite a bit about strategy and then of course rolling it out to the field level. But I'm interested in hearing from each of the panelists about some of the enabling technologies that you're using at a corporate level as well as within the bureaus or the directorates to help better inform you of your workforce strategy, especially around the data analytics piece. If you could speak to that, that'd be great.
So, so we have an integrated personnel and payroll system. So that's certainly helpful for us because there's quite a bit of data that we can work with within that system. So that's one of the technologies that we use. I think as we look forward, we recognize that there's a need for a talent management system or in making that investment. So there's some pieces that we know today, but they're with an integrated talent management system, we know that we would be able to know a lot more. Also have it integrated throughout the life cycle, thinking about learning and development. So we're in the process of assessing that path. So even with the existing systems today, we're thinking about how we use business intelligence tools to get more data out of the system, maximize its usage, but we definitely see a need long-term for an integrated system.
Then a 3 to 5 year, and you say long term?
Oh, certainly, yeah, certainly within the next years.
So I started talking about, in the beginning, I said it's really not about data analytics, it's really about the engagement, and sometimes that's necessity is the mother of invention, because we don't have an underlying HR technology system, which we're now in the process of, already in the process of investing in. That system will be a core HR system that will become the so-called database of record to do the things that Mary is talking about, and it is about business intelligence and business analytics. That process, in terms of getting it across 11 highly federated operating divisions, and oh, by the way, each with individual missions and appropriately individual missions and different operating models and business models based on what they do. One's a regulatory environment, another one's a biomedical research, et cetera, and so forth. So that has been a huge undertaking to get the entire organization to have a view that it's not only about the core transaction processing that we're going to get out of this, but the longer term play that we'll have to do the things that you're describing, and it's been agreed, and so we're off on that. But it's 18 months to 5 years.
So you want to go and then I'll talk about Crowder.
Well, you can imagine at NASA, we probably have all the different tools that we can possibly ever dream of. No, we can cut the data in pretty much any way we need to, but one of the things that we're always looking for are things that kind of couple competency and managing competencies to our learning management systems and understanding that connection more and more and more. We're the division when I was up at NASA headquarters, the division I was managing is just starting to look at a learning management system. And actually we're calling it a learning management environment because it's going to be all encompassing of a lot of different things. So that's kind of the next wave that we're moving to. We have a very tactical learning system now. It's called Saturn. Training, you put in training requirements and that sort of thing, but actually coupling that to competencies and other things, I think is the wave of the future for us.
When you hear me say talent management,
Same,
versus
very
learning
same.
management environment, it's the
Very
idea
same.
about how you connect those pieces together, also integrate it with performance management.
Exactly.
So
Integrate
a complete life cycle and enforcement.
Yeah.
And so, as you know, OPM requires the agencies to
Right.
send us all of their data for the Enterprise Human Resource Index, right? EHRI, and we can do some of the work that is necessary to do some real targeted analysis of the workforce, but we don't have all the data. We really don't. The biggest blind spot for us is that talent management piece. We are not able to see into how the agencies are doing, and I know most of the agencies can't either. With the new executive order for the SES, we are looking to create a talent management system for the SES and figure out how we would deploy that across government so other agencies could leverage it. And another piece of this data that we don't talk about, but at OPM we think it's critical, it's everything that's on our unlockedtalent.gov, right? It's all of the engagement and the inclusion data and the satisfaction data. And there's a wealth of information there, and sometimes we don't think about it as part of our strategic workforce planning, but we really need to.
Great, thank you. Let me do a quick wrap up. And one of the things I've learned, because I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, so I love data. You know, the foundations are reliable, valid, you know, all of these things. But I've had to let go of some of that, because to wait until your data is complete, is 100%, is reliable, you're going to be waiting for a long, long, long time. Don't do that, and help your agency and your managers. We know that most of our, maybe not assets, but most of our HR systems are incomplete and are not where we would want them to be. But don't hold that up. I think too many good workforce planning processes don't get started because we say we don't have good data, or we don't even have the data. But the managers know their unit, they know what their work is, and they know who's working there. And they can start having these conversations and talking about the what ifs. What happens if this happens, then what I'm going to need or what I don't have. You can start that without the beautiful data displays and slicing and dicing that is our holy grail of hope that we will get to one day. So that's one thing I want to take. The other thing is, you know, the new normal, it's all about surprises, right? It is, and leaders don't want to be surprised. We're never going to be able to tell them exactly what they need in their talent to do this, but we can help them be ready. It's not the same thing as to being not prepared. We can help them prepare, and if you talk about it with the what ifs, and well, what happens if 50% of your workers retire in 2 months? What's going to happen to that knowledge? What's that knowledge gap going to be? Start the what if conversations, just engage them in that. They are already, something's keeping them up at night about their lack of talent, or they're worrying about these things. Engage in that, see where they're coming from, what are their pain points, and talk about that, because what you're doing is helping them be prepared. But we're not going to be able to ever not have those surprises, but we're preparing them to be better equipped, and having thought through some of these, it won't be such a reactive, you know, kind of hair on fire as if you had run some of those scenarios. So I really think this is an enabler, and this is, so from wherever you are in your organization, and you're all in different places, and we have something to all aspire to with some of these wonderful things that John has shared. It isn't, because it's a journey, it's not a perfection. But you know, really, I think these are so exciting times. Let the managers talk to you about their workforce issues and problems instead of us coming and saying, we know you're going to have this. Let them, that's going to engage them, and that's going to keep them, and then make it a decision-making process. Show that from what they brought to you, those decisions are what actually transpired, and then you'll start really creating that culture that this is something we must do in order to meet our business strategy. So linking it to their needs and the business outcomes is critical. I also just want to add, I'm obviously very excited by this, but I think we've reached a tipping point, because many of us have been trying this for a long time. Why? Because A, we now know data-driven decision-making works. And we are in a place where we're getting better data and big data and multiple source data. But data-driven decision-making is now very much across this government, evidence-based decisions. All of these things are here. So that's one tipping point. And we really have predictive analytics and modeling. We have really moved to a sophisticated place where what we do have in data and really using that. And those two things combined, I think, really have taken this from a nice to have, great that NASA can do it, but we'll never get there, to it's a must have, because we can't meet our business and mission without it. So I'm really excited. I really thank you for coming today. I thank the panelists. What wonderful advice and stories and data and wonderful successes that they're sharing here, and we just look forward to the community talking more and sharing more about this. So thank you, Debbie.
Well, Bob, when you got these flyers, we also incorporated this document, which is the panel helped put together, which not only addressed some of the questions that they asked, but a few people here provided resources. I'm sorry, a few people provided resources. So everyone who registered should have received a copy of this in the email. If you did not register, just let one of us know. You have all our contact information, and we'll get you a copy, because there's some really good information in it. If any of the panel members have additional resources you want to share with your peers, let us know, and we'll get that out to everyone as well. So thank you again.